After many days of questions, Carney confirmed there will be a budget delivered this year on Canada's economy.
We will have a much more comprehensive, effective, ambitious, prudent budget in the fall. You do these things right, and that's what we're going to do.
This apparent about-face after Liberals faced some sharp criticism when Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne signalled on Wednesday there would be no spring budget. Instead, Champagne said the government would put forward an economic statement in the fall, which is usually smaller, less comprehensive than a full budget. Mark Carney's new cabinet will need to tackle a slew of priorities. The U.S. trade war, obviously, that's having an impact on Canada's economy, affordability challenges, and concerns in the West over natural resource development. One of the biggest changes to Mark Carney's front bench is Mélanie Joly, moving from foreign affairs to industry. It's something she says she asked for, and I spoke to her on Thursday about the move and her new role. Minister Joly, thank you for being here. Nice to see you in person.
Thank you, Rosie. Happy to be here.
Congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
It sounds like this was something you wanted, that you wanted to move into a more economic portfolio. Why was this the one you hoped for? What are you hoping to do there?
Well, listen, for me, it's going back to my roots. I'm a former businesswoman before going into politics. I also used to be the Economic Development Minister. And as Foreign Minister, which of course it's a job I loved, but I saw that, what you're seeing in the US, what you're seeing in Europe, what you're seeing in Asia, the main issue every time, and every election, to be frank, it's the economy. And so for me, it was important in the context of this trade war to leave the diplomatic front to go to the economic front. So I worked on the causes of the war, of the trade war. Now I want to look at the consequences, because I know that the trade war is having an impact, and we haven't seen it that much yet, but we will be starting to see it. And one of also the consequences, Rosie, will be just overall the fact that there's a lot of economic uncertainty, and that is driving down investments. That's a problem for our growth, and we need to make sure that we engage in new types of diplomacy, which is really getting investments around the world here in Canada. And so I'll be not doing state-to-state diplomacy, but much more state-to-business, state-to-CEOs diplomacy, and I look forward to doing that.
You, of course, have been around a long time, and you've been at the cabinet table for a long time, and that was one of the criticisms, certainly by Conservatives this week, that this is not enough change. In terms of what you've seen from the Prime Minister, the way he leads a cabinet meeting, the way he deals with ministers, can you tell me how that is different and how you think his approach is different when dealing with cabinet?
When just let me say this to the Conservatives is I wouldn't take any lessons from the Conservatives, particularly from a leader of the Conservatives that not only lost his election and his seat, but also has been in Parliament for more than 20 years. So talking about change, just look at yourself in the mirror. So that would be my first point. My second point would be, Prime Minister Carney, of course, is very different from Prime Minister Trudeau. Different men, different parties, different styles, different personalities. What I like of working with Prime Minister Carney is he's very results-oriented and very economically focused. And it fits with how I work. I love to be able to achieve things. I love to be able to lead through really not only results, but impacts on the ground. That's why I went into politics. And that's also why I wanted to leave the international affairs portfolio and really go back to on the ground and seeing what's the impacts of what government can do for people. And meanwhile, I know around the world that there are real questions about what are governments doing for people and how we can deliver. And so for me, it was at the core of my involvement in politics, and that's why I'm happy to have this job.
Okay, so let's talk about how you're going to deliver on a couple of files. Steel and aluminum and the tariffs and the way that industry is being affected. Do you get the impression, because you were also down in Washington, that those tariffs could be lifted maybe not as quickly as the fentanyl ones, but very soon? Is there any room for negotiation there?
So, two things. First, I really think that President Trump wants to make a deal. He said it to Prime Minister Carney many times. Whether that will take weeks or months, I don't know yet. but he's under a lot of political pressure.
Okay.
He is under the political pressure of, not only our counter tariffs, because we're the biggest client of the U.S. and bigger than, China, Japan, France, and the UK combined, but also we launched an entire ad campaign about tariffs being taxes against hardworking Americans. And you know what? Americans believe us. And they know that right now cost of living is higher in the U.S. because of the tariff war. So President Trump is unpopular right now. It's just a reality. That's why he wants to sign deals. He just did it with the UK. He just lowered tariffs on Chinese products.
Yeah. And except the Prime Minister has also, he was asked about that by British television this week, and he said, those are examples, but this is going to actually be more complicated because the relationship is much bigger, right?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Of course. So you can't compare the UK with us, and also the UK wanted a trade deal with the US for so many years. I'm not saying they got a trade deal, but they got a deal. And their trade deficits and surplus are completely different.
For sure.
For us, we need to do two things, and these are my two priorities. Really help the people working in the steel and aluminum sectors, and that's why I was on Friday in Bécancour, meeting the people in the steel sector, really working on the auto sector also. That's why next week I'll be going to Ontario, meeting with the workers there. Okay. Really, they're the ones that are under this economic threat, and they're the ones that are really fighting and that we need to support. And of course, all our counter tariffs that we've put in place generates revenues for the government, and we know that we have $2 billion worth of support to make sure these industries are well supported. And my second objective, Rosie, which is really important, is because of this economic uncertainty, people have halted their investments or have, kind of paused their investment. So I need to work on creating that certainty, creating that reality where people are interested in investing. And where we think we can make really good inroads is the defense sector. We need to build the defense sector in Canada. We will invest more than 2% of our GDP over the next years. Why send that money to the US? Why send that money to Europe? We need to create jobs here at home. It won't happen by fluke. Yeah. But these are investments that can help solve some of the issues we may have in the auto sector or, elsewhere in the country.
But speaking of investments, as you know, Honda has postponed this $15 billion EV investment in Ontario. I know you spoke to the CEO. Yeah. I know they said no jobs will be lost. But to me, that also means that no new jobs will be created. If they are pausing this for as much as 2 years, it sort of begs the question, what industry will there be for the EV vehicle industry? Well, all that work that Minister Champagne did doesn't seem to be bearing fruit if Honda's saying we're not going ahead with this right now.
Well, because I think there are a couple of reasons why. Because there's a trade war with Trump. Yeah. There is also the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act of Biden, that really created much more of an industry in the EV sector, and that Trump is not following suit. And meanwhile, it's just the demand on the part of consumer has lowered. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we have conversations, find ways to be in solution mode. That's why I for sure will want to go to Japan and Korea and in Europe to talk to CEOs in that sector. And meanwhile, I think that we can drive the economy through also different sectors, definitely the energy sector. We can become this energy superpower the Prime Minister has been talking about. We can invest in AI, digital tech. And finally, my last point is because I'm in charge of research, I think, and what we're seeing with President Trump going after Harvard and other universities, we can attract the best and the brightest here in Canada, and that will be my goal. And I'll work with Mona Niemer, the head, scientist of for the Government of Canada, and also with universities across the country.
I want to end on the budget. The government is not tabling a budget this spring. I know that's not your job, but there is a view by Pierre Poilievre and others that this does send a signal to investors. You're not laying out what the plan is right now. The most that the Minister Champagne has said is there'll be a fiscal update in the fall. How do you justify this? I mean, I know that there's not a lot of time, but surely there is an opportunity to tell Canadians what the state of Canada's finances are.
I think we need to make sure that Canadians understand what is, what's the state of the economy. I think there can be different formats to do that. Of course, this is a decision by the Minister of Finance. Yeah. and I'll let him do his job. But I'm convinced that we can find ways to do that.
But you don't think a budget is needed right now?
Well, I think a budget takes a long time to do, but I think also it's important that we are able to inform Canadians. We are the most economic government in years, and it's a question for us to make sure that not only do we deliver results in terms of the economy, but we're able to inform Canadians and investors.
Okay, Minister Joly, thanks for being
Pleasure.
here. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
In addition to those 28 ministers, Carney brought back the ideas of secretaries of state, naming 10 of them, junior ministers whose role is to support full cabinet ministers. Among those, a rookie to MP, the lone MP from Saskatchewan, Buckley Bellinger, who was sworn in as the new Secretary of State for Rural Development. Secretary of State Buckley Bellinger, nice to see you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's start with just how you feel about getting this opportunity. You're a new face in the ministry as a Secretary of State for Rural Development. How excited are you? How do you feel about it?
Well, we are very thankful to the people that got me here, the people of northern Saskatchewan. The riding is Desnedi, Mississippi, Churchill River. And it's just obviously a great place to live and work and raise your family. But they're the ones that should be thanked for having me here, and I hope I do a great job for them. It's always on my mind.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about Saskatchewan, because you're the only Liberal MP from Saskatchewan. Premier Moe has said that he looks forward to building a stronger relationship with the federal government in Saskatchewan. And I wonder whether you think that is important, because as you know, things have been a little fraught at times between the Premier and the federal government. How are you planning to work with the Premier to try and strengthen that relationship?
Well, I do have a history with Premier Moe, and obviously when we hear the Prime Minister talk about one Canadian economy and being familiar with all aspects of Saskatchewan, having a long history, I just think those are all assets, and to me, I think Canada includes Alberta, includes Saskatchewan, and that's a positive attitude I'm taking forward. But clearly, Carney's message of let's get to work, let's build up our country, and let's build one Canadian economy, those are really good directives for me to follow because it's consistent with how I view Canada as well. When
you say you have a history with the Premier, a good history?
Well, we sat on opposite sides, but it's always been a very respectful relationship. I've spoken to him on many occasions behind the bars, the phrase they use. But he clearly wants what's best for Saskatchewan, as I do as well.
Yeah. One of the things, he put forward a list of 10 priorities that he had for the federal government. One of them was negotiating with China very quickly to get rid of the tariffs on canola, oil, and peas. Have you had that conversation with the Prime Minister? What can you do to help that piece of the trouble that Saskatchewan's dealing with?
Well, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we sit down and have a conversation with Premier Moe.
Yeah.
And I know and listened to the Prime Minister speak on various occasions. He's always been very pragmatic in his approach. I understand they're going to have a First Minister's Conference in Saskatchewan, the first time in 40 years.
Yeah.
So the Prime Minister is making a lot of overtures and trying to stay engaged with Alberta and Saskatchewan. And I commend Premier Moe for putting that list forward.
Yeah.
At least it gives us a game plan, and we're able to work and facilitate with him. That's obviously something that we want to do.
What are some of the challenges, do you think, for Saskatchewan right now?
Well, as I've said before, there just seems to be a disconnect. And when you look at the makeup of Saskatchewan, you have northern Saskatchewan, then you have rural Saskatchewan, then you got the city perspective as well. So they're a landlocked province, and they obviously aspire to do greater things nationally. They got great oil and gas reserves. Their economy is based on agriculture. So they have a lot of opportunity, but like every other province, they have certain challenges that they want to address. And I think Moe is just simply presenting to the national government and our Prime Minister some of those issues. Energy
development, I know it's not your file in particular, but you mentioned there that Saskatchewan has lots of opportunity. What is your impression about how aggressive your government, the government, will be on potential development of new pipelines or new energy sources?
Well, I can tell you that most people, from my history, know I'm a pro-development guy. But there's two aspects we also want to throw into the mix. One is that we can't be compromising the environmental integrity of the process. I think that Canadians want that. And my background being Métis is that, the Indigenous community want to be part of that development as well, not simply cheerlead the economy, but be a full partner in it. And those are some of the things I think need to be said. But clearly, I think Saskatchewan has a lot to offer Canada, and vice versa. Canada has a lot to offer Saskatchewan. And I think our Prime Minister is certainly looking at through Saskatchewan, or through that lens that Saskatchewan has, he certainly has ambitions for Saskatchewan as well. You
are not a full cabinet minister. You're a Secretary of State, which was a model that Jean Chrétien had and Prime Minister Carney has brought back. What is your understanding of what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to work with another minister, I guess?
Right now we're sitting with Minister Joly, and she's a fantastic co-minister to sit with. She always refers to me as minister, and I appreciate that.
So you're under the Minister of Industry.
In Science and Innovation.
Right.
But I would characterize my role as a Secretary of State, to a ball team. Every ball team, you have your pitcher, your catcher, your first, second, third base, and so on and so forth. And we've got some excellent people out on the field right now. But if the Prime Minister says, we need a designated hitter, and we're part of the team, and he looks across the Secretary of State. Okay, Belanger, let's come on up and see what you can do with that bat. So that's how I would characterize the Secretary of State. It is a very important position. We've got great staff that are, throwing a lot of stuff at me right now, and I'm trying to absorb as much as I can. Yeah. But clearly, we do have a role to play. We are in cabinet. We will be sitting with anything doing with rural Canada. We'll be at the table. Anything to do with Saskatchewan, I think we'll be at the table. And when the Prime Minister has these kind of meetings, of course, it's always up to him. If he directs me, instructs me to be there, I will be. Yeah. But he's really trying to reach out to Western Canada, and I see evidence of that all day long.
What difference do you think that's going to make? Because, of course, the last time that we saw a Liberal in Cabinet was Ralph Goodale. I'm sure you know Mr. Goodale. What difference does it mean to have someone from Saskatchewan in this role, do you think?
Well, it's really important because you look at the country of Canada, we never had any representation since Goodale. Mm-hmm. And somebody proposed a question to me, if you win, what's going to be some of your first parts of your job? Yeah. And I told him, I want to Ralph Goodale the heck out of my northern ride here, because Ralph brought a lot of benefits from Ottawa to Saskatchewan. So I want to mimic his style, and that's how I view my role.
Well, good luck. We'll talk again, I'm sure, but thank you for coming in for your first interview and your new role. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The Prime Minister announced that there will, in fact, be a budget after all this year.
We have some very clear priorities, which, as you know, from following those who followed the campaign, those who followed my remarks, those who followed my opening press conference, would include the federal government taking all the steps it can to help create one Canadian economy out of 13, in addition, initiatives such as the middle class tax cut. But there will be a budget in the fall.
This apparent about-face after the Finance Minister, François-Philippe Champagne, signaled on Wednesday that there would be no spring budget. Instead, Champagne said the government would put forward an economic statement in the fall, much to the ire of the opposition. So let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist, former parliamentary bureau chief here at CBC News. Robert Benzy is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star, and Emma Graney is an energy reporter for the Globe and Mail in Calgary. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here on a long weekend Sunday. We're going to talk about cabinet, but I do want to get your perspective on this change from the Prime Minister this morning, that there would be a budget. So Rob Russo, I'll start with you. I don't know if this was always the intention and Minister Champagne didn't get the memo, or if the Prime Minister thought there should always be a budget. But the reality is that the government let sit out there for 2 or 3 days that there would be no budget this year, this calendar year, and now the Prime Minister says, no, there will in fact be one. What do you make of all this?
Mr. Champagne would not be the first finance minister ever left out in the cold on decisions like this. I remember Jean Chrétien was a finance minister when he was alarmed to find out that Pierre Trudeau had brought in wage and price controls. It's possible, unlikely. I think the Prime Minister heard not just the criticism of the opposition, but also of business leaders and leaders on Bay Street as well. I think it negated the notion that he was going to move at lightning speed. It reinforced the notion, when you look at the size of his cabinet and with the suggestion that there wouldn't be a budget in Canada for a year, that the marshmallow walls that inevitably envelop new governments that are ambitious were beginning to close in on him. The size of his cabinet kind of reaffirmed that. This decision suggests that he is still, it seems, capable of making a quick decision and maybe slicing through those marshmallow walls that tend to close in. And I think it's probably the right decision. It's one thing to say we are uncertain now, given the tariff environment, of what kind of threat is in front of the Canadian economy. But he does have a plan. Mark Carney has had plans for a dozen years of what he would do if he was prime minister. It's time for him maybe to start putting that plan into action.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, his comments today weren't really about the tariff threat. They were really about time and the fact that he didn't think there was adequate time. And Rob Benzy, that he also thought, he also alluded to security spending in his comments, as though this too needed to be factored into a budget in the fall. But what do you make of where we are now with this conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was an artful excuse for him to say we want to wait until after the NATO meeting. He's not wrong. There isn't much time. And with all due respect to Minister Champagne, I think that most Canadians know that Mark Carney is actually the finance minister as well as the prime minister. That's his forte. And I think that it will be his budget very much when it is tabled. I thought it was bizarre when Champagne said, I guess it was last Wednesday, that it would be just a fall economic statement, which is a mini budget at best, and at worst, just a statement of the finances and the fiscal outlook. I think Canadians wanted Mark Carney to win the election because he seemed like he was the one who had a plan for governing and a plan for dealing with Donald Trump. And I think not having a budget this year would have been a very, very bad look. And the Conservatives were not wrong to attack him on that. I think that Pierre Poilievre probably had his best moment since that terrible day for him on April 28th, when he said, look, he was the guy who said he was about plans, not slogans. Well, not having a budget is not having a plan, and that was correct.
Yeah, and in spite of all this, Emma, budgets are, very much communications documents as well, sort of to outline the things the government is going to do. But nevertheless, this government in particular seems intent on doing things very quickly. So I wonder whether having a budget and sort of a snapshot of the Canadian economy this fall will also be reassuring to people, to Canadians and businesses, about where things are and the direction that the Prime Minister is taking things.
I would think so, yeah. I mean, you just got to look back, as Rob rightly pointed out. I mean, this was a large part of the campaign, right? Economics are kind of front and center of what they were talking about. And the idea of not having a budget really, it throws that issue of transparency right under the bus. And we're all journalists. We love transparency. We think it's the best thing ever. But I do think that Canadians would have loved to see that transparency as well. And now they will see that. And it does certainly follow through with some of those campaign promises, or at least it can start off potentially following through with some of those campaign promises, potentially with stimulus spending. We talked there about tax cuts as well. So this is, I think, an important move so that Canadians get the transparency that they want. Well, that they want according to who they voted in to be the new federal government.
Okay, I only have about 3 minutes, so you're all going to give me sort of your first thought about the new cabinet. Rob, your one thought about this cabinet.
I'm afraid I heard the silent creeping of the marshmallow walls with the cabinet. I thought that he sent a signal with his election cabinet that he was going to do things differently, that he was going to sprint towards another destination, a destination different from his predecessors. And it looked like the creeping blob had got a hold of him. He needed ministers with made-up titles in order to fill out, quite frankly, regional representation and quotas and other things like that. So it was a bit disappointing. That being said, I think that there's some really interesting picks there. There's some interesting kind of bold moves. Tim Hodgson, I think our old colleague Evan Solomon going into AI is it's a portfolio the Prime Minister really cares about. So I'm not sure how much Evan is going to enjoy having the Prime Minister looking over his shoulder. But he will be, and he's going to have to build a completely different, a new department with DMs and staff and bureaucracy. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. And I'll be interested to see how our old friend and colleague deals with other ministers who are going to be watching Evan, because his department, his responsibilities will go across every single one of theirs, from defense to industry to procurement. It'll be interesting how he handles that hornet's nest as well.
Robert Benzy?
Yeah, I agreed with Rob that Tim Hodgson and Evan Solomon, though they seem like Mark Carney's picks. First of all, they are Mark Carney intimates, I guess you could say. Yeah. Tim Hodgson worked with him at Goldman Sachs and at the Bank of Canada. Hodgson is well known at Queen's Park, the level of government I cover, because he was the chair of Hydro One, a utility that has really done a lot of pretty solid work with Indigenous communities, getting infrastructure built and things like that. So I think I'm going to be interested to watch that. He's someone who's trusted on Bay Street, which they need, I think, and Emma will know more about this. I think they need someone who's going to be trusted on the oil patch, and perhaps he will be certainly more so than, say, Jonathan Wilkinson or someone like that was. I think that the difficulty for Mr. Carney is he does have a lot of Trudeau-era retreads in that cabinet. Yeah. So but at the end of the day, he's the change. He's at the top of the ticket, and he has to be the one who sends the message that, look, there is a new sheriff in town, and I'm the sheriff, not Stephen Guilbeault or this, that, or the other one.
Okay, Emma, we're going to start with you next hour. I'm out of time, but that's good, because the conversation next hour is about pipelines and climate change and all those people, and you'll be the perfect person to start us off. Thank you. We'll talk to you next hour. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.